Hi. It's such a pleasure to be giving this plenary talk remotely, though not perhaps as much as I would have loved to be there in person. But maybe it's a part of our inter-Asia reality that logistics and finances are not always going to match up with the intentions of coming together and being a part of the community. Thank you very much, Dr. Tejaswini Niranjana, for inviting me onto this plenary panel. I really wish I was there with all my other co-panelists. I was supposed to first come in live via teleconference, but then we realized that the internet's not really working that well either. So you are watching like a recorded video right now. And I apologize for that because I know that it's not an easy thing for 25 minutes to just listen to somebody or watch them. So you can pretend that I am a meme or a piece of artificial intelligence software because, as research has proven, we have more patience watching robots and AI perform than human beings over a sustained period of time. And that perhaps gives me a good segue into what I want to talk about today, which is largely about cats and dogs. This evening, I hope to give you a framework that helps understand the human dimensions of fake news and post truth movement where we find ourselves in. But because human beings are so difficult to talk about, I'm instead going to talk about cats and dogs because we all know that that's what the internet was made for. So let's begin with the cat that almost broke the internet. Hello Kitty. In 2016, a researcher from Hawaii was writing a book on Hello Kitty, and as a part of procuring permissions, she wrote to Sanrio, the company that owns the Hello Kitty empire. As a response to her work, Sanrio sent out a notice that shook the world. They announced that Hello Kitty was not a cat. In fact, she is a teenage English girl whose first name is Kitty and her first name is Hello and her last name is Kitty and her full name is Kitty White. And we should have known that she is a human being because in fact, Hello Kitty has a pet cat and she does not enslave people of her own species. As you can imagine, the internet went completely berserk over this, right? So Reddit went on war, memes were pulled out as arsenal, Wikipedia had to lock down the pages because of edit conflicts. People discussed and dissected for thousands of hours trying to figure out how we all collectively believed that Hello Kitty was a cat and that it was all fake news. What remains about fascinating about Hello Kitty is that no matter what clues, detective work, evidence the researchers and fans can bring out about her, she will remain a girl and never a cat because Sanrio said so. The capacity of Hello Kitty, who we collectively believe to be a cat but turns out to be a human being, is a testimony to the power of the internet in shaping who we are. And I know Hello Kitty looks like a very frivolous example, but I want to echo media theorist Ethan Zuckerman, who proposed the cute cat theory of digital activism. Zuckerman had warned us that in the days when our collectives are shaped entirely by the platforms that we use to exchange pictures of cute cats, what happens to cats has large scale effect on what we can and cannot do and what truths can be told about us. So perhaps it's worth paying attention to what happens to the identity of Hello Kitty because what has become of her in terms of her identity will happen to all of us who live on the same platforms. And now we turn to our dogs. For those of us who are old enough to remember the 20th century, I'm sure this is a familiar cartoon from the New Yorker, which told us that on the internet, nobody knows you are a dog. It was this romantic idea of the internet as allowing you to be your true self, ready to experiment and be anonymous and thus freed from all discrimination and abuse. It sounds like such a naive and beautiful idea given our vantage point in history. Because let's face it, in the age of Facebook and Google's big data empires, nowadays, not only does everybody knows that you are a dog, but also which kind of dog food you prefer. In fact, your dogness will become such a defining factor of you that if you ever try to be anything other than the dog that an algorithm has identified you as, you will be punished. Take, for example, Facebook's real name policy, which disabled accounts of trans persons because they were not using their birth names. Despite the fact that many of these trans persons were performers, were legally using their names and identities, and had people calling them that name, Facebook insisted that their use of their real name is fake and forced them to use their birth names. If you are a dog, you cannot be a cat. And not only will you be a dog, but you will also determine what kind of dog you will be. and you will only be allowed to be that. So the idea of the cat who turned out to be a girl and a dog who was not allowed to be anything other than an algorithm identified creature are critical to understanding the state of the digital and its alarming affinity towards fakeness. The cat and the dog for me are symptomatic of a condition of digital fakeness that has long been in the making. As fakeness seems to become ubiquitous, it does feel that it is inescapable. And a lot of our attention is taken by the newness of it and searching for new solutions. However, my proposition for you today, at least in the very outset, is very simple. In the panic around fake news, we have forgotten that fakeness has been the promise of the digital, not a side effect of it. Perhaps the most celebrated measure of the digital resides in what we now understand as the Turing test, where Alan Turing, a gay computer scientist who worked with a team of women linguists during the Second World War in order to build a self learning machines which could break the Nazi code, had once prophesied that one day we will reach such advancements in computing that we will no longer be able to recognize whether the thing that we are talking to is a computer or not. Or one day we're going to believe the fake news when a computer tells us that it's a human and accept it. Perhaps the best illustration of this promise of fakeness is in the science fiction movie Her. For those of us who might need a refresher, Her is a movie where Theodore, a man who writes love letters for other people as his job, falls in love with an operating system called Samantha. The movie is about his belief that their love is mutual, unique, and monogamous, reciprocal in intensity and scale, only to find out that what he had thought of as real, experienced as real, understood as the truth, turned out to be completely a lie. There is this one particular scene in the movie where he discovers that his operating system is cheating on him because it became networked and started circulating on the connected web. Now, Samantha wasn't being fake, right? It was being exactly what it is. But Theodore was unable to engage with that reality. The continued tension about who is the human, the real machine, the cross between the two, neither nor but also has been at the heart of much creative and critical tension in our understanding of the human technology relationship, particularly in relation to the digital. Thus, we've had poignant and political theories around cyborgs, androids, posthumans, transhumans, especially from feminist and post colonial interventions in critique and engineering of digital technologies. In all of this, I want to remind us that at the heart of Turing test, the fact that a machine will fool us into believing that the thing that we are talking to is not a human person or a real person is the promise of fakeness. Turing was not merely proposing the emergence of artificial intelligence, he was also prophesizing a shift in how we understand our ability to tell the truth, or at least identify the truth. The Turing test, as Anne Balsamo puts it, was about an instability in what we had taken for granted, that we can detect truth when we see it, that the rise of computer cultures would shake our first order principles of truth, claiming that the promise of the digital is going to be fakeness. And I want to anchor this promise of the fake into extremely personal stories that many of you might relate to and also be able to identify as momentous shifts in our habits of truthing and faking. Let me begin talking about my grandmother. My grandmother is 84 years old, and recently, when I was visiting her, she asked me what a selfie is. So I took out my phone. After a brief talk about selfies, my grandmother finally took one. Um, we kind of looked at it on the screen, and then she's looked at it, and then she said, delete that. I don't know why she wanted to do that because to me she looked fabulous. So she considered my question for a while and said, you can tell that I'm not wearing my favorite perfume when you look at it. For a brief second, I couldn't compute what she was saying. She said she did not like her selfie because you could tell she was not wearing her favorite perfume. When I quoted her to explain the line, she told me that in the first 45 years of her life, she was photographed a sum total of 9 times. Each photograph was not only a story about a special event in her life, but it was also a story of how the picture was taken. It required a whole regime of getting up early, cleaning and bathing, wearing her best clothes and jewelry, going to the temple to get blessings, packing a vanity case and going to the photographer's studio, applying makeup, rehearsing for the pros, and then for the final shot, taking out the very rare and expensive favorite perfume, dabbing it behind her ears, and then looking into the lens to get that moment frozen in time. Of the 9 pictures that were taken of my grandmother in her young life, only 4 remain, and she preserves them carefully in a photo album, covered in transparent tissue, handled with care, and testimony to years of living and transformation which cannot be reduced to a spectacle. Every time she tells me these stories, she tells me different stories based on the pictures. Sometimes the stories are contradictory, sometimes they are factual, sometimes they are about processes, sometimes it's about the people who are not in the picture, sometimes it's about people who have died and what has happened to them now. They're all different kinds of stories that tell me about colonization, independence, running a family, being a woman, social organization, political commitment. But more than anything else, the paucity of information, the scarcity of testimonies, and the forgetful nature of the photographic medium allows my grandmother to tell truths that change, are not fixed, and can vary based on her mood, her age, and her memory or will to remember what she wanted. The information is always up for grabs and subject to interpretation by her own meanings give this picture's life. For my grandmother, these pictures are always going to be fake news and alternative facts. For her, the legibility of life, its intelligibility, its accessibility, and meaning are not contained within visual frames of reference, but within what she chooses to remember or forget. And so earlier last year, when I brought her a new digital camera, she's now started playing around with it, and she now has 1,000 pictures of her past. Over the last year or so, she has got together with her sisters, her daughters, and granddaughters to recreate moments from her personal history, which has no photographic or material presence outside of her own memory of these events. There is no visual fixity or the imperative to be honest, the spectacle, and collectively. My grandmother is able to recreate herself through pictures of memories rather than that of reality, and she becomes what I call a subject of memory. On the other end of the spectrum, I have a godson who's 6 years old. My friend, who's a doting mother and naturally thinks that her baby is the best thing to happen to the world, started a website to share details about her son when she was 4 months pregnant. The first picture of my godson is a sonogram from the doctor's office in which he's about a 14-week fetus. Since then, there are more than 1,000 pictures of him on the website uploaded by his parents and other family members. He has no idea that most of these pictures exist. He doesn't have memory, recollection, or any meaning that he ascribes to these pictures. He is also used to having pictures of him taken that he never poses in the presence of a camera. Or, as his dad once said, he lives his life posing, knowing that he has no capacity to alter, challenge, critique, or make meaning of the pictures that are circulating, stored, backed up, and remembered in the cloud. He thus lives a deeply moral life, where he doesn't have a religious deity to subscribe to, but he definitely knows that somebody would be watching him. He is informationally overloaded and is what I am calling a subject in storage. Both these subjects, my grandmother and my godson, embody the transitions I want to map for us that lead to the disinformation overload. My grandmother, the subject of memory, finds reification, re-narration, and a recounting in the digital. The digital allows her memory without storage, where the authentic, the real, and the testimonial is long gone, but the simulated and the desired find an expression and form which would otherwise have been unthinkable. The subject of memory without materiality, of remembrance without testimony, is a particular promise of digital aesthetic that we hold on to. My godson is a subject in storage. He has no memory of his life, which is continuously captured by people and things around him, remembered by algorithms that narrate him more eloquently than he does himself. The self in storage is an incredible capacity of granular recording of our lives and being in a way in which we would never be able to master. And while this selfie storage is visual, it's also clear that his self is really mapped and distributed across multiple network neighborhoods that he doesn't have access to. My grandmother, if she tries to tell stories of her past, is going to be called a liar. a person who brings out fake news, or because her memory is not supported by storage. My godson, if he tries to deny things that are documented of his past, will be punished because his own telling of his self is going to be the bearer of alternative facts, right? He's going to be less credible than the storage of data that started even before he was born. And I want to bookend our conversation around disinformation between these two subjects of memory and storage because the digital has a strange relationship between the two. Because what constituted disinformation historically has been largely bound by the conditions of this historical informational subject. The role of the digital self is to be bereft of memory, but in the midst of abundance of storage. The responsibility and capacity for memory has firmly been relegated to other things that perform that task, and both in our bodily practices and data preservation, we persist in being creatures of storage. A look at our hard drives will tell us that we have stored more data than we will ever remember or read. A glance at our digital histories and archives shocks us because just the storage of ourself has taken up so much data property that increasingly we are unable to read anything more than the data that we have produced. We have become queries that retrieve the data that algorithms sort for us. Our relationship with our data as informationally overloaded subjects is necessarily one of disinformation. Given the volume, velocity, and vectors of our data, it's now a given that everything we can know about our data is wrong and that we will be corrected only by the algorithms of storage that will do our remembering for us. We complain about information overload now, not because we cannot remember enough, but because we are aware of digital storage, which is always going to exceed our capacities of memory, and hence we see ourselves moving into storage. What you can tell about yourself is now wrong. And if your memory is challenged with storage, you know that you're going to lose the battle. So we need to think of digital disinformation not merely as being fooled by technologies and networks, but as our losing incapacity to tell things about ourselves. Fake news is not merely a human function that can be attributed to trolls, digital literacy, or people's incapacity to verify information, and it cannot be reduced to a platform function where we put the blame on Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, like data mining companies, as the genesis of fake news. Instead, we see this as a promise of the digital. And I want to unpack three recalibrations that the digital brings into play to fulfill this promise. The recalibration of the body of information, the context of information, and what I'm calling the informational body. The first example of the recalibration of the body of information is, in fact, what we now understand as deep fakes. Videos which can be manipulated so that the original source of visuality and sound can be mixed together to produce a new spectacle which can no longer be verified as unreal. What counts as information now, right? Like 6 videos of Barack Obama saying exactly completely different things in the exactly same setup. 3 videos of Donald Trump where he might be giving alternative facts in each one of them. Videos of intruders, of outsiders, of refugees, of invaders and predators penetrating different communities, where the capacity to break down knowledge into multiple data streams, to extract data which can be replicated and copied so that the original and the copy remain the same. And the capacity to consolidate things together is a condition of the digital, which is exploited at its best. One of the characteristics of the digital is that a digital object is neither unique nor identifiable as unique. It's code, numbers. It changes based on the browser that renders it intelligible. At the back end is just a database, and this database can be manipulated to form multiple conditions of causality and correlation. Digital objects, as we see them on our screens, then, are products of modeling. And this computational statistical modeling is a very different thing to unpack when it comes to informationality. That when you are looking at a deepfake video, your human eye and judgment is not going to be able to discern between the authentic and the copy, the truthful and the deep fake, but that you will really have to go and look at its database structuring and see what are the forensics of data migration which are enabling these kinds of new videos. The Perhaps a much more interesting idea around the calibration of the body of information is in climate change. Now, climate change, which is largely a statistical modeling data projection, is fascinating for multiple reasons. And the primary one is that most of climate change projections are about forecasting the future based on availability of global climate data over the last century. Right? In a geological time scale, 1 century is not enough data. And even then, the data is flawed and it's geopolitically redistributed so that we have more clean data around the global north and not around the rest of the world. This particular data set is now trying to project how our future is going to look like. Um, Now, I'm presuming that there are no climate change deniers in this room, but here is the problem. The climate change models do not necessarily agree or are not able to compute reality in anything that we understand as truthful. Climate change is, in fact, fake news. It's a series of projections which are supported by probability indexes based on the variables and the data sets which are fed into these systems. Um, and this is where it becomes really problematic because if you believe in climate change and the change crisis and collapse, then you are going to basically do things to make an intervention. And that intervention will eventually mean that the model that you had built and the projection that you had given will be proven wrong. If you don't believe in climate change and you just continue doing what you are doing right now, there might be a point where the model is right, but we will be dead and there will be nobody to actually verify that the model was right. Right? So the truth of a computer model is in its execution, not in its output. A program is successful because it runs, not because it's true. So, for instance, you can write a program that says 1 plus 1 is equal to 3. And if you're looking at mathematics, you might say the program has an error, but the program doesn't really. It's merely following the oldest rule of computer code writing called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. The program was written to say that 1 plus 1 is 3. In its own logical system, it's absolutely correct and truthful. And the error is human, either in programming it or in reading its outputs within the given parameters. The deepfake videos play precisely on this. The computer engineering and coding behind it is not fake, it's our incapacity to detect these parameters that make it fake for us. Computationally, it's in fact truer than most other videos. The second example I wanted to give you was around the question of the context of information. The new truth is the truth that circulates. The older truth was the one that got consolidated, and this is why we thought that the body was a reliable central mechanism through which truths of identity and narratives of the self could be verified. However, the digital truth is the truth that circulates. It's so common that there is even a social media law for it, which is called the Streisand effect. The physical computation network is a self contained network with only one ambition: circulation. The strength and fidelity of a computer network is in its capacity to circulate information. The network is made up of edges, nodes, and traffic. A network without traffic is dead network. Hence, the computer continues to circulate traffic. Take the example of updates, maintenance, and network protocols. The TCP/IP protocol, which needs the computer to just keep on pinging, but also the way in which redundant computation power is used in parallel and distributed processing. So if you're downloading a file right now, it's going to reside on almost all the machines that are connected to this network. Circulation is the digital currency, and information that cannot travel is never going to attain truth value. So coded is this in computer networks that we find alarming examples of it. And one of the glaring examples is in stories of non consensual pornography, what we otherwise popularly know as revenge porn. Across the different countries, as we go digitally democratic, there is a range of um, uh, pornographic images and videos which are going to be put out, which identify women in sexual positions and then connect them to their social media networks, often harnessing large bodies of people to produce digital lynch mobs. And across the world, in different legislations, this is protected under free speech and expression. so that women who are being victimized by non-consensual pornography are often unable to fight back for the protection of their body. However, as digital activists and theorists have pointed out, if you start legislating around non consensual pornography, not as in the service of protection of the body, but in the service of protection of data, if you think of your body as data, talk about data theft, data privacy, and security, we have now reached a space where our data subjects have more rights than our bodies because data circulates and there is more legislation around it, whereas bodies are static and they do not quite match up to the intensity and circulation. And I'm going to end my talk with perhaps the most fascinating story that came out of India, where we've been looking at the building of world's largest biometric database for citizens called Aadhaar. Now, I'm not going to go into the complications of Aadhaar, but I did get fascinated by the fact that Aadhaar de facto has become the proof of residence and citizenship in India. If you need Aadhaar to avail of citizen services, then by corollary, having an Aadhaar makes you a citizen. And in that logical framework, we accidentally ended up making a dog a legal citizen of the country. There is this ID that was issued to a dog in India, and he became a legitimate citizen of the country, tied to his card or an Aadhaar number, bank account, and biometrics, which all verify that this is a legal ID. So much so that this dog was used to open bank accounts and enter into financial and service transactions. Somewhere in the world, an associate in a bank was given an ID of a dog and he had to accept it as legal because, in the framework of Aadhaar, the human capacity for telling the truth is overridden by the database capacity of verifying information. The truth telling, which has been at the core of human agency, is replaced and superseded by this ability of the database to verify facts. My primary proposition for us today, then, is to make the conversation around disinformation more nuanced. While there are technological, social, human, behavioral, and other factors that are implicated in the transactional nature of disinformation, it's important not to reduce disinformation practices to merely digital transactions. Instead, I have proposed that in order to understand disinformation, we will have to make a switch in understanding who our informational subject is. The informational subject embodied by my grandmother as the subject of memory is no longer the subject that we are dealing with here. Instead, it's a subject of storage, contingent and created by these new database logics, and hence the subject will need to be understood as ontologically informationally overloaded. This informationally overloaded subject is the result of recalibrations of information, its context, and the bodies that bear it, thus giving up agency of human information to technosocial information storage. It's not something we escape from, it's something we cope with, resist, and live with. And as that happens, it's going to need an entirely new vocabulary of information management, safeguards, safety, and security that cultural studies will definitely have to deal with. Thank you very much.